Hey everyone. Like David said, my name is Sebastian. I'm an engineer at Intercom. I'm well aware of what many of you are thinking. I'm the last man standing between you and lunch. So I'm going to keep this entertaining and valuable. You can find me on Twitter as SDuqueJ. So let's get started. I'm actually going to start with the main things I want you to take away out of this talk. If you're a manager, it's that you can unlock the potential of your teams and org by empowering and rewarding ICs to drive change. You probably work with a bunch of really good engineers that build great product, great software systems. And if you grow a culture that values org-level work, you'll have no shortage of good initiatives that make those teams way more effective. If you're an IC, to be proactive about identifying org-level opportunities for improvement and to bank on them, be open to those opportunities outside of the code editor. They'll really change a bunch of the dynamics, the culture of the teams you work with, and the impact that can be had by working on them is pretty hard to measure, but really big. So, if there are any logicians in the room, I'm sorry, but roughly what I want to convey here is that growth implies change. As time passes, it implies change as well, and when you get both growth and time together, they compound, and you get change squared. Intercom's a fast-growing tech company. Like I said, you mix these two together, they compound, but like that compounding isn't unique to startups. Change is the only constant across tech companies of many different shapes and sizes, so I'm sure many of you can relate to what I'm going to be talking about. For us in particular, this looked like, in 2011, 2 engineers in one office, really easy to communicate, really easy to be on the same page. 2015, 35 engineers, 2 offices. 2019, 160 people in engineering, 30 teams, 3 offices. These days, what's an office? Just work from home or work distributedly, 220 people in engineering, 40 teams. So while it's the same company, these are all like very different teams facing different challenges. And you probably work on a company that's on a trajectory similar to this one, or perhaps even more steep. What we've done is relied on a strong culture, understood as a shared set of values and principles, to be the backbone during bursts of growth like the ones you would see on this slide. So some of those shared values are shown here. This is a snapshot. They'll change with time as your priorities and needs change. And they're encouraged, promoted, and recognized. They're taking into account in performance reviews for both engineers and engineering managers. And we strongly believe role modeling these is a way to have outsized impact. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will go deeper into ownership because I think it's the one that I think is more valuable to this talk. It's really hard to tease these apart when you look back into different projects and experiences because they're very essential in how people work. So follow me on the ownership journey. Here's how we define ownership internally. It is about caring, not box ticking. We're outcome driven. People who own things will naturally fight to overcome obstacles to reach the outcome. People who are great at owning things earn trust and confidence to own bigger and bigger things. When they see something is broken, they say something. When they see something can be better, they fight to make it better. They're never passive. They never feel powerless to make progress. They use positivity as a tool to help themselves and others overcome obstacles. And owners never say, "That's not my problem." You can have ownership at very different Zoom levels. Again, if you're an engineer, that probably looks like the features you own or the systems you own. It could be around tech debt, product debt, or what this talk is about, shortcomings in org-wide processes. You really want to get to shared ownership, where it's not just an individual caring about something. You want to identify an impactful thing that a group of people care about, and then work on that thing to make it better. Having collective ownership is important because it guarantees that you're working on something that many people see the value in improving. The engineering forum is a tool we've used at Intercom to identify those things to improve and to assemble those teams to have that shared ownership. It enables like a shared understanding and a shared working on problem definition and solution ideation. And what we've done, how we've done this in the past is we've gotten a representative group of engineers, only ICs, no managers, send them on an offsite. We haven't done one of these in a while. It's going to be interesting to see how we do the next one. And what I mean by representative sample here is people from different teams, people from different locations, people from different tenures. Basically, don't just get the senior and stuff plus engineers, cast a wide net, and enable them to surface and drive org-wide improvements across anything that gets flagged. Gather notes, start discussions. How we have seeded engineering forums in the past is with 2 prompts: focus on what is really good and what really needs to be better. So what are the 3 most important challenges that if fixed would make engineering an even better place to work, and how should we fix them? But also, what are the top 3 things we're doing well as an org, and how should we double down on them? Many things can be talked about. So you want to keep the discussion focused and like centered around what the most impactful ones will be. These are some of the topics that have been brought up during different engineering forums and have been discussed in the past, and in which we've grown and have had different projects as a result. So feedback and recognition, the engineering quality bar, diversity and inclusion, knowledge sharing, product quality. It's a wide spectrum. For some of these are actually like the outcomes or things that have happened as a result. Just going to go through these 4 in a second. So on feedback and recognition, when it happened, we got more clarity around timelines, performance ratings, how performance reviews affected changes to compensation, how to give feedback to managers. It was something that engineering was missing. It was flagged. It got addressed. It's by no means done, but it's a step forward. On our engineering quality bar, we had a fire hose problem. We had, at the time, low signal to noise ratio in our error tracking. It allowed us to carve out some time to drive significant improvements with org-wide impact and see a step change in how useful exception tracking was. So that work that was being talked about earlier, where it was really hard for engineering to invest time in observability. Hello? So this is out of that engineering forum. This actually let us make changes there and improve time on it. Product quality, it was hard for us to know which issues were more customer impacting, and it led to a program being spun up where we have now gotten to a place where teams have a metric that lets them quantify the customer impact of an issue, the potential gains from fixing them. They get clustered around product areas, so you know the value of working in a specific area of the code base. And it's become a key input into road mapping, issue prioritization, and team health metrics. And lastly, knowledge sharing. This is the one I'm going to go really deep on and use as an example. So I'll give you more visibility into what the process looked like, what the problem was. So bear with me for a second. All right. So again, wide diversity of domains. Some here are technical, some are process related, some were driven by engineers, others were driven by management, in particular the one around edge compensation process, but they were all flagged by ICs. So let's get concrete and go into that knowledge sharing example I was just telling you about. We found ourselves with a knowledge silo problem. Like, it was just really hard to for most engineers to get answers to specific things that were outside of the remit of their teams. We had institutional knowledge that lived with tenured engineers. We used a bunch of different tools like Google Drive, GitHub, Notion, Slack, face-to-face conversations. Questions were being repeated time and time again, and there were no canonical answers. So it depends on who you ask, you get a different question back. The world we were in had us with existing tools that were not conceived with a focus on engineering, which isn't terrible, but it's not ideal. And we had a really low bus or lottery factor. So what if those 2 people that know feature X win the lottery and we never see them again? Would be in a hard place. So in the spirit of letting the people closest to the problem, engineers, have a go at fixing them and owning the solution, we got started on our journey. I suggest you don't reinvent the wheel and to lean into your org's core strengths and processes wherever you can. For us, we were largely influenced by our R&D principles to how we build software. They look like starting with the problem first, thinking big about what the solution might be, but starting small and learning fast, shipping early, shipping often, having tight feedback loops, and seeking to deliver outcomes. Not like you don't end when you ship something, you're done when you deliver the outcome you were after. And we use these to guide and influence how we work and make decisions. Has anyone read or heard this before? Yeah, some people nodding, some people raising their hands. That's Brooks Law from the Mythical Man Month. And it's mostly due to communication overhead increasing. As the number of people increases, there's a combinatorial explosion. You have more communication lines, the number of channel increases. This is the best illustration I've ever found for it. You've got 3 people, you've got 3 lines. 3 lines, it's a nice triangle. When you've got 14 people, you get 91 lines, you get a nice, I don't know what that is. And like roughly the formula would be this, right? So when you get to 160 people, which is where we were in roughly in 2019, you get 12,720 lines of communication. Obviously, in practice, this isn't true. Organizations adapt and structure themselves in ways that reduce the number of communication lines. So, for example, we can broadcast messages. We get asynchronous communication tools. We have designated points of contact across teams, or we use teams and groups as abstractions over which high-frequency communication and coordination happens. But I think it's still interesting to keep in mind. So the approach we followed, and like this is the approach we followed specifically on this knowledge sharing problem, but it's something that is generally applicable to different initiatives, probably across different domains, different companies, was to first form a representative working group, capture the understanding of the problem first, make sure that that understanding was agreed upon, not just by the members of the team, but by the people we were solving the problem for, so engineering. To try something small first and take small steps to a full solution. And finally, and continuously assess how we solve the problem fully or partially and like make changes as we went. So yeah, getting started, like, hey, get a representative working group together. You want to be inviting and inclusive, people from different offices, different backgrounds, different teams, groups, tenure, seniority, different day-to-day roles and responsibilities. And what you're after is actually solving the problem for the wider group and not just a subset of people in your org. The sponsor is someone that is in management, ideally engineering leadership, and they're there mostly to offer support, give directional guidance, connect people, open up opportunities, do budget approval, that sort of thing. But they're not like day-to-day involved in the work that would have been a part of this. So the next thing is capturing the understanding of the problem. What we did was poll engineering, much like if we were doing a software problem. You want to understand your customers, understand their problem. So did some research, and we asked them, hey, is this really a problem? How bad is it? Where do we start? All of this while making an effort not to get solution biased and to keep an open mind. So for example, we asked people, hey, on average, how easy is it to find the information you need? And you'll see no one said 5, which is like the best. Only 4 people gave us a 4. Everyone else was like struggling. We also asked people, hey, which of the following tools do you use to regularly find information? And we see a wide distribution here where there's like a few like things there at the top. So Notion, asking in Slack, and asking face-to-face right up. But then there's a really long tail of ways to find knowledge that were happening. And lastly, we asked, hey, which of the following do you find most effective for finding information? The 2 there that are like 70% in aggregate are basically asking people, whether it's on Slack or face-to-face. So we wrote all of that up, had some brainstorming sessions, and emailed engineering. Hey, this is where we've gotten. We offered to have ideation sessions with anyone that was particularly interested. Again, well, you have already you have formed an inclusive working group, but you want to be even more inclusive. People might have strong opinions about these things for good reasons. So you want to increase your chances of getting to a better outcome. Doing this type of communication also shows progress and builds trust. You're not just out there somewhere in the back working on something. You're showing what you're working, and you're opening yourself up for opportunities for feedback. We eventually landed on using Stack Overflow for teams. So the next section of this talk is going to be like how we went about actually rolling that out. So we started with something small first and then iterated. You want to be conscious about scoping. An analogy we often use at Intercom is to start with a cupcake. So if you were building a wedding cake and you're not a baker, you probably don't want to go full wedding cake right away. You probably want to like start with a smaller cake first, or start with a cupcake. You want to make sure you've got the fundamentals right before investing further. Like, does the oven work? Do we even have an oven? And that's not even getting into what's involved in baking cupcakes, which I've got zero knowledge about. Again, this closely matches how we think about building product. So we're just like repeating those patterns that are like part of how we work, and not diverting too much from what people are familiar with and we know works. So yeah, start small and take small steps to a full solution. So started a 6-week trial, seeded with questions that have been asked recently, invited new folks and teams, opened the floodgates, had champions and teams that like helped push for this to be adopted, and eventually landed on a company-wide change in culture. Obviously, what's going to happen next is going to walk you through these in detail. So we started a 6-week trial. You want to find an amount of time where you think you will actually get meaningful feedback. Many of these tools will like maybe give you 2 weeks, but it's just going to be really hard to get actual data in 2 weeks of usage. So push for something that's going to be actually meaningful, and it's going to increase your chances of success. We seeded the Stack Overflow space with questions that have been asked recently. And what you're effectively after here is aiming to prevent the cold start problem, where you invite everyone, there's nothing in there, people don't come back. So we found domains that require specialists, but where generalists need to operate in to be of really good ROI, return on investment. So for example, security or specifics of components in our design system, or observability and monitoring. Those are like things that many people would often need, and like things that kept being asked time and time again. So we had that ready, we had some questions in place, and we opened the floodgates and integrated with Slack. This meant really having it in the forefront of how we collaborate inside and between teams. And the tool just happened to have a really nice integration where you pasted a link and it would show a snippet, or where like with some commands, you could go in and like prompt someone, like they ask you something on Slack, you'd reply with a command that prompts them to ask that thing in Stack Overflow. So it just sort of made the integration easier and like made it easier to bake it into how we collaborated. So some champions started to emerge. We had teams like what we call Team Cloud, which is effectively our infrastructure team. They get asked a bunch of questions all the time around like maybe instance provisioning, permissions, a bunch of things that many teams rely on. Like basically any platform team would be in this position. And they made it the first thing for teams that wanted to interface with them is like, hey, have you searched on Stack Overflow already? And if you have and you didn't find what you needed, can you ask it there instead? Saw some people that were seeing questions coming in and then going into like answer there. So it started to pick up momentum. At this point, we saw some people being confused with like, hey, what's the right thing to ask in there? When do I ask something in Stack Overflow? When do I write a doc about something? So we captured best practices, basically, and wrote a short doc on like guidelines, which help people make the best use of this. Again, something you collaborate on and like get feedback on from different people. And we started to assess how we solved the problem fully or partially. So we were tracking new questions coming in week to week, new answers coming in week to week, the median time to answer, and the answer ratio. It's not something we paid that much attention to, but it was still there and useful to see. So again, we started to track this over time, celebrate the small wins, and do small nudges to keep things on track when they were sort of veering off in the wrong way. You can see there from like a month to the next, just like searches increasing by probably 60%, which was really great to see. And something we learned the hard way was that having a goal or target is good, but you don't want to obsess about an absolute number. Trajectory is really what matters here. Are you moving in the right direction? That's what you're after. So like these graphs are like just, I think, really good at showing like the trajectory that you're in is pointing at like improvement happening. We then went back and asked those same 3 questions we had asked at the beginning, and like polled engineering again, like, hey, now that this is in place, which of the following do you find most effective for finding information? And try to get a read on usage. So have you used the Stack Overflow since it was launched? We started to see it was eating some of the pie from asking people directly. This was one early on. This was one later, where we now see it's increasing more. So we definitely saw adoption and effectiveness increasing with time, which filled us with confidence that we were moving in the right direction and delivering on actual value for the engineering org. So this all led to an eventual change in how we work, and more teams using it up front to centralize curated answers. So Team Cloud is the one I talked about before. Our data source team sort of like saw the value in that pattern that they were using and pretty much copied it, which again, like you're banking on those like smaller tests that were done by one team and then distributing those lessons learned across many others. Started to see like people just asking directly like, hey, I looked for this, couldn't find it in that other place. Can someone point me in the right direction? The example on the left is like Danny there, like, oh, he asked something. Of course, there's Stack Overflow for this, I'm sorry. But then the next time the question comes in, he's like, hey, we actually use Stack Overflow for this. It's helped me in the past, and points people there in that direction. So like people internalizing those things and then widening the usage. It was also a change in how we share knowledge. So this happened fairly recently, about a month ago. So with being distributed, and like some things are easier to explain by talking and showing and pointing at things than by writing an answer. So Intersnacks came to life, not to remind me of lunch coming soon. But what it effectively is questions that as answers have both a short paragraph but a Loom or video link to it, where people are walking through the answer and showing people how to do a certain thing, for example. So in closing, the vast majority of an engineering org are engineers. It's non-controversial, but you should trust and empower them to identify, own, and work on opportunities for improvement outside of just code. You're going to get a healthier org by doing this. A quote that's wrongly attributed to Gandhi is, be the change you want to see in the world. I think what he actually said is closer to this, which is as an individual changes their own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards them. Do not wait to see what others do. Be an agent of change is what I would like to close out with. So thanks, and enjoy your lunch.